Are you tired of losing to Priest? Are you confused about what to play in the newest patch? Or do you wish to harken back to the good old days where Emperor Thoracine made OTK decks real? Well, fear not, I have the deck for you. Exodia Mage aims to kill your opponent by assembling all the pieces to cast infinite fireballs at their face. The basic game plan of the deck is similar to other OTK decks that we've seen in the past. Stall the board, draw loads of cards, and win with your combo pieces. For this OTK deck, we're going to be using Open the Waygates to gain us an extra turn to kill our opponent. All the cards in our deck do one of 4 things: stall the board, draw us cards, quest activations, and our combo pieces. The deck runs 1 Open the Waygates, 2 Sorcerer's Apprentices, 2 Molten Reflections, 1 Simulacrum, and Archmage Intonitus. With the quest complete, you can use Molten Reflections and Simulacrums to get 4 Sorcerer's Apprentices on the field. Cast the Time Warp you get off the quest, then throw infinite fireballs with Antonitus and the discounts off of the 4 Sorcerer's Apprentices. So we have the way to win, but how do we get there? That's where the rest of the deck comes into play. 2 Babbling Books, 2 Primordial Glyphs, and 2 Kabbalist Tomes generate us cards from outside of the game. These are our quest activation cards, and they are crucial for getting us that extra turn. 2 Arcanologists, 2 Doomsayers, 2 Frost Novas, 1 Ice Barrier, 2 Ice Blocks, and 2 Blizzards all act as board control and stalls for our deck. Fishing out our secrets with Arcanologist helps us thin out our deck and also gives us an extra turn later down the line with Ice Block. Frost Nova and Blizzard stalls the board and often leaves our opponent stuck with wasting a turn. Doomsayer can be paired with Frost Nova for a board clear, or it can be used in the early game to ward off early game pressure. For our draw spells, we have 2 Novice Engineers, 2 Arcane Intellects, and 2 Cold Light Oracles. Because of the way the quests work, it'll always be in your starting hand, but what do you do with the rest of your mulligan? Arcanologist is on the top of the list when trying to mulligan. It can be used as an early game board presence and to thin out your deck. Other good cards are Babbling Book and Primordial Glyph because they help with the quest and they help you look for answers. Arcane Intellect and Doomsayer are also good picks. From here, the game plan is to draw cards to hit your stalls, quest activation, and combo pieces. Hitting Kabbalist Tome on a safe turn puts you miles ahead of your opponent, so getting a good Doomsayer into Tome is ideal. Your quest activators often generate additional secrets to disrupt your opponent, extra freeze effects, or even card draw to help you along. You might also get a Primordial Glyph off of a Primordial Glyph to help you get a free trigger. But be wary of your hand size, and be careful if you know your opponent is playing Cold Lights. While milling just about any card can be recoverable, having them mill your Antonitus is an automatic loss. Along with the same point, be careful of Dirty Rats. If you're playing against a Control Warrior or another deck that runs Dirty Rat, try and keep a minion in hand to lower the chance of them Dirty Ratting out one of your combo pieces. This deck wins by being as non-interactive as possible. Face is not the place for you, and you will almost never target your opponent's minions directly. You're going to be freezing the board most of the time when stuff gets too dicey. You're only going to be using spot removal when it's generated off of another card. Remember that you can have just 3 Sorcerer's Apprentices on board and leave the last Molten Reflection as an activator for Antonitus. Make sure you're stalling the right boards. Stalling the board early on when there's only 5 damage on board might not be useful when you could wait for a much bigger board. Stall, stall, stall until you have the pieces to win. This might not sound fun for your opponent, and it's not, but it sure feels good when you're throwing those fireballs. Although the deck has been around since the release of Ungoro earlier this year, it's only fairly recently that we've seen it being played as more than just a meme deck. 12 players brought the list to the America's Summer Playoffs, while at the Asian Pacific Playoffs, Coco Sasa brought one in his lineup to finish in 2nd place. Before running off to craft this bad boy, we should look at some stats. The deck only has a win rate of around 43 to 46%. So why are so many players bringing this to tournaments when it has a negative win rate? Well, the answer is that it might be bad versus the meta as a whole. It also does very well against many of the top decks. Against Raza Priest, Big Priest, and Jade Druid, this deck does fairly well. But against most of the other decks, like Murloc Paladin, Pirate Warrior, and Aggro Druid, the deck falls apart. The reason people are bringing this to tournaments is because they are targeting these slower decks that allow Exodia Mage to take the time to get their pieces. But it might be the time for Exodia Mage to see a rise on the ladders. Many of the decks that are popular that work well against Exodia Mage have gotten nerfs as of patch 9.1. Pirate Warrior, Murloc Paladin, and Druids all saw nerfs to key cards, which means we will see them less frequently. Because of this, Priest is expected to see more play, which would increase the win rates on ladder. But beware of hunters who are going to be targeting Priests, because they are your worst matchup. The deck costs a pretty hefty 7,600 dust, and with most of the key cards being legendary and epic cards, there isn't a nice budget build of this deck, sadly. Even though the deck list is tight, there is some potential for some flex cards. Ghostly Conjurer is a common addition to the deck, often cutting out one of the blizzards. You use Ghostly Conjurer as a board threat that can trade down and also generates you an extra spell that works to your quest. You could add Acolyte of Pain as well for even more card draw. But watch out, because your opponent might be able to mill away one of your combo pieces if you're not careful. Some lists run Curator to pull out your Cold Lights, and an Alexstrasza. This adds more card draw and also some healing, but might be too expensive for some. Some decks opt to have different combo pieces entirely, having Alexstrasza and 2 Arcane Giants to burst them down with minion damage. Because you only need 2 Giants to pull this off, you could keep Molten Reflections and Molten Giants to increase the likelihood of you getting combo pieces. You could also have the Curator like I mentioned before, because it increases your odds of getting Alex. The downside of this plan is if your opponent runs taunts or even some armor gain, you could be in a lot of trouble. This is why most players opt for the Exodia package. In Wild, you could even run this list, which uses spare parts as cheaper spells to trigger your quest quicker. It also uses Mimiron's Head as a win condition, summoning Voltron to burst your opponent down. This, while extremely funny, suffers from the same downsides as the Giant version. Exodia Mage aims to be in a good position going forward, so if your game plan is to target Priests, and you have a lot of dust to burn, go right ahead and assemble the pieces of the Forbidden One. But be careful, this path could leave you open to being punished by more aggressive decks. Thank you for watching my video. If you have any suggestions on a deck tech you want in the future, leave me a comment. Hope you guys have a great time with this deck.